Okay, so today we are going to be learning about wax resist. Use wax resist always on the foot ring or any surface that will be touching the kiln shelf. Otherwise, your piece will fuse to the kiln shelf, and the only way to separate them is with a hammer and chisel, and the pot usually does not win. A little bit of a glaze run or a little dot of glaze will not make that happen, but if you completely forget to do wax or to wipe the bottom of your foot ring or whatever is making contact with the kiln shelf, it will fuse and need to be removed in a fashion that is not favorable to retaining your piece. So in order to prevent that, one method is to apply wax to any area that's going to touch the kiln shelf. Okay, so it's not just about this area here. It's also about understanding and thinking about the kinds of glaze that you're going to use. Are you double dipping on the outside? If you are, how far? What's your knowledge of glaze running with those combinations? If this is your first time glazing, I want you to refrain from double dipping an entire outside surface. It's okay to have one color on the inside and then dip the very rim, maybe about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch on the outside, and then dipping the rest of it in another color. And then you would have an overlap of about 1/2 an inch. You got plenty of room for those glazes to run or do whatever it is that they're going to do. Another thing to consider when you are determining how far up the outside of the foot or how far up the outside of your form you should wax is how the form comes down to the kiln shelf. So on this piece, the curve of this form, there's nothing that really is going to slow it down all that much. This one is a little bit more perpendicular and vertical, so it will slow down a little bit. This one doesn't really have a whole lot. So I have a couple of options. I can either wax up a good, somewhere between 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch on the outside surface. I could wax this entire bottom here and follow kind of this line that's present in the contour. As you develop in your wheel throwing, you should begin to think about creating places for the wax to end that is conducive to painting the wax on and conducive to an overall design. At this point, you're probably just waxing your pieces, your very first pieces, and you might not have thought of doing that. So in order to wax, you want to use your paintbrush, and you can see that I'm dragging my paintbrush. I'm able to stabilize my hand on the rest of the bowl here. If I'm unable to do that for whatever reason, I usually will use my pinky to help stabilize my hand so that I can keep a pretty crisp line. The wax will prevent glaze from absorbing any surface that you apply it to, and that includes inadvertently. You could put your finger on this wet wax and then grab the outside of your bowl and then end up having a wax patch over here. Well, the glaze is not going to stick to that area, and you will have a kind of a bald spot on your piece. So it's really important to be able to focus and pay attention when you're glazing, so that way you don't make these kinds of errors. Now, if your brush happens to go off the edge or off a little bit, you can use things like a X-Acto knife to literally scrape the wax off until you get back to the bisqueware. But the one thing you do not want to do is you do not want to try to remove wax that has gotten somewhere where you don't want it with a sponge. You will simply smear it and you'll end up making the situation worse. You can even transfer areas of wax that seem dry. It's a waxy substance, and so it's kind of like oils, right? It can get on your skin and you can transfer it and not even see it. And then you go to glaze and you have these bald spots on your pieces. So you really want to be able to take your time and be able to focus as you are waxing your pieces and prepping them for glazing. Okay, so again, I want to have a nice straight line. If I'm quick or I do short little brush strokes, I'm going to end up with a really uneven wax line, which will result in an uneven glaze line. See if even there's just a trimming mark or a trimming line that pretty much goes the whole way around your foot, or some other dimensional line in your piece that will allow you to create a wax line that makes sense for the design and also allows your brush to kind of ride along that three-dimensional surface. That is why we use these brushes specifically, is because of their long bristles, and what they do because of that, they really hug the three-dimensional contour. For any kind of foot ring, you do need to be aware of the inside of the foot ring. Generally speaking, you want to have glaze here unless this surface is so close to the kiln shelf, you know, or that the foot ring is so shallow that with a dime's thickness of glaze, it's going to end up touching the kiln shelf. I have another video that you can watch that shows how to remove remove wax with a X-Acto knife blade. But I'm going to do it again here because the definition of that video is not very good.